Welcome to the podcast of the Global Positive Health Institute. I'm Simon Matthews, one of the directors of the GPHI, and it's my absolute delight and great pleasure today to introduce you to Sonya Looney. Many of you may know that name already, particularly if you inhabit the world of, perhaps elite sport or elite mountain bike riding. And we'll get into that shortly. But it's wonderful, Sonya, that you could join us here today. Thank you very much for making the time. Sonya, you are a seasoned podcaster yourself, as you and I have been talking about prior to this. So, in fact, a lot of things. You are an extraordinarily busy person. I wonder whether you could start by just giving the listeners and the viewers a brief overview of the things that you have done and do.
That's always a difficult question to answer. And thanks so much for having me, Simon. And I'm very passionate about global positive health, as you'll hear in a moment. I would say that curiosity is a thread that weaves through everything that I've done in my life. So, as you mentioned, I'm a professional mountain biker. I've been world champion. I've raced all over the world. And I didn't grow up riding bikes. I grew up as a nerd and a band geek. So a lot of people think that, to do something or to be something, you have to have done it your whole life. But I would say that in my story, I've made lots of pivots in my life that have been sparked by my own interests and having a deep understanding of what I want to do in my life. And that is to help people be better every day. And that has had a bunch of different iterations. So whenever I started as a professional mountain biker, that wasn't my goal. My goal was actually to prove myself. I had contingencies of self-worth with competition and just trying to prove that I was enough through racing, which made it a challenging place to be as a performer. And over time, it became more transcendent. It became less about trying to prove myself and more about how I can help others. And that has manifested in several ways. It started as being a blogger, back in like 2007, 2008, to writing for magazines, feature-length articles on some of these adventures, but also like what goes on in your mind whenever you're doing these really hard things out in the Himalayas or the Sahara Desert or wherever I was ending up. And then it continued to iterate to social media and then podcasting, which I've been doing for almost 7 years. And then a couple of years ago, I became a national board certified health and wellness coach because I just wanted to help people, but I wanted to be able to do it in a way that was actually proven in, or at least like indicated in psychology, like what's the best way to help people change their behavior. And from that came my master's in applied positive psychology that I'm currently working on at the University of Pennsylvania to increase my level of expertise in positive psychology and its applications in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing you haven't mentioned is that you're also a master's qualified electrical engineer.
Yeah, I did a master's degree in electrical engineering early on in my life, in my early 20s.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So I wonder if you can, invite us inside your mind for a moment, and take us to, a place where perhaps you're racing or competing in a cycling event. Maybe it's an endurance event. I'm sure it's very hard, whatever it is. If I'm inside your mind, what am I seeing there? What am I hearing you say to yourself? What am I observing you do as you participate in an event like this?
This is a wonderful question that nobody has asked me in this way before. So thank you for that. Honestly, it depends. So generally, I try to have my mental forecast, so to speak, is I try to have a lot of positive self-talk using my name or the word you if I'm trying to talk about what I'm doing. And it has motivational aspects to it. And it also has instructional aspects to it. So, you got this, you're doing well, like, you can keep going. And then, have I eaten recently? Like, bike body separation in this corner, look ahead, like questions like that to try to, or comments like that to make sure that I'm staying on track with what I'm doing. Whenever I see competitors on the course, I'm that quote, here's a direct quote from somebody. you're that crazy girl from Brazil ride. This is at a different race in South Africa that I was at because I have fun when I'm out there. Yes, I'm competing. Yes, I'm pushing myself. Yes, there's concerns and all those things around performance, but really that's not how I approach competition. I approach it as a joyful celebration. And it isn't always joyful, but like I'm the one out there who's like yelling at other people, like cheering for them or like singing a song to try to get somebody to laugh. And like zest is one of my signature strengths, right? So like I'm actively using that whenever I'm out there racing my bike. But honestly, a lot of the time there isn't a lot going on in my mind. I'm more in a state of engagement where I'm not thinking about anything and I'm just there with my bike. Um, and then I'll take you to whenever things aren't going well. And that happens a lot. Like a 100-mile mountain bike race, 160K, you're out there for 8 hours. It's all weather conditions. It's all the things happening. So sometimes things aren't going well. I don't feel good on my bike. I can't get my heart rate up. I don't feel strong. I've had a flat tire. I've crashed. Like I'm just not performing where I want to be. So where does your mind go when that happens? And for me, it's become over time, I've had to train this, but it's a level of acceptance without resignation of like, okay, like this is where we're at now. We're just going to do the best with what we can. It's a de-emphasizing of the self on the performance. So I am not my performance. This is just one of many performances. How can I make the best of this situation? And then there's a zooming out that happens. So if I'm really struggling, I say, this is just a blip in the world. I imagine the entire world and all the people in it and the little stupid thing that I'm doing called racing my bike is so insignificant in the grand scheme of things to try to pull myself out of such a self focus. And last, I just remind myself, this isn't permanent. Like I'm going to be sitting in a chair when I'm done. And this moment that feels so intense and horrible is just going to be a distant memory because I know I've done this before and I'm making a bigger deal about this than it actually needs to be.
Wonderful. So, Sonia, I'm hearing in all of that there's a fundamental level at which you simply embody and embrace joy and an effort to capture everything that life has to offer and has to throw at you and celebrate that. There's a level at which you engage with yourself compassionately and kindly. And there's also a level at which, on occasion, you stand back and become an observer of yourself in order to, I think the word you used was de-emphasize some aspects of what might be going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Sonia, I wonder whether you could continue to take us on a bit of a journey here, and share with us. I know you said that these things haven't necessarily been part of you for your whole life. What was it that actually sparked this desire for mountain biking in particular? Because there are lots of ways that you can prove yourself, right? I mean, you could have become a kayaker, you could have become a mountain climber, you could have become the world's most extraordinary electrical engineer. Why mountain biking?
Yeah, I think this is also a great question because it emphasizes the importance of going after that thing that you're not sure of. Because a lot of times we'll make up reasons why we can't do something that we're interested in, but there's all the reasons why we can't. So what would happen if you actually allowed yourself to explore that? Well, you might discover that, wow, like maybe I actually am good at this. So there's like a talent, which I don't really like talking about talent, but a talent that's been unrealized. And then number two, maybe I actually really love this. And maybe this is going to change my entire life, which is what happened to me. You know, as I mentioned, I was a nerd. I did my undergrad and my master's degree in electrical engineering, and I discovered mountain biking at the end of my undergraduate degree. And I really wanted to explore mountain biking. And I found it because some guys at my work invited me to go mountain biking. I never heard of it before. I had run a marathon when I was 18, and that gave me confidence in myself that I didn't have before, simply because that was the first thing in my life I had done because I wanted to do, because it was interesting to me, not because it was like I had to get a grade for school or I had to impress somebody. I just wanted to do it myself. So that gave me a confidence that I didn't have before. So I was just open to the idea of going mountain biking with some guys at my work. And they invited me to do a race. It was only after a couple of weeks of mountain biking, but I had fitness for running. So I thought, sure, I'll give it a go. And I
Mhm.
just fell in love with it. And I wasn't very good at the beginning, but it was just so much fun. I felt like I was expressing myself and figuring myself out on a level that nothing else in my life had provided for me at that time. And I still feel that
Mhm.
way. And I'll
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
share a funny anecdote because I kind of left you on a cliffhanger before we hit record about my master's degree in engineering. So I found mountain biking, but I was living in New Mexico in the US, and I was traveling for racing and mostly taking road trips in my busted out Nissan Sentra and sleeping in my car going to Colorado. So I thought, well, I need to move to Colorado so that I can be a pro mountain biker, but I don't want to work a full-time job because then I won't have flexibility to travel and train and race like I want to do so I can become a pro. So I thought, well, I'll just apply to grad school. I don't really like engineering, but I'll apply to grad school because I'm good at school and maybe they'll buy me some time. So I applied and I got into the PhD program at the University of Colorado in power electronics, and then I focused on biomedical engineering. And that enabled me to have like, which sounds crazy, free time so that I could train and race
Uh-huh.
and see if this mountain biking thing was going to pan out for me. And fortunately, over time it did, but it wasn't an overnight success story. In fact, I would say that I was probably racing for about 7 years before I thought, well, like maybe there actually is something here for me before things started changing.
Who would have thought that being a nerd could be such a pathway to sporting achievement?
Yeah, I love telling people that
Um,
story because people assume I had this passion for engineering, but I love math and science, but I was just trying to figure out a way to make my dream happen. And that just happened to
mm.
be, I should have just been a barista at a coffee shop or something. That probably would have been a lot easier.
One of, Sonia, one of the things that I heard you, in fact, I heard you not mention when you talked about taking on mountain biking, was the idea that in endeavouring to reach for something that's outside of us, something beyond us, something that we aren't certain to do, aren't certain of being able to do, um, there's a very real risk of not achieving that.
Hmm.
There's a very real risk of simply, I think you mentioned, I wasn't good at it for some time. There's a distinct possibility that one could continue not to be good at this for forever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, tell me how you balance the risk and the reward there.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to why you're doing it in the first place, because especially when you start achieving, that becomes an expectation. And especially when you're a high performer, now you have other people's expectations of you. And expectations can take joy away from what you're doing. And all the things I'm talking about, I'm not perfect at this. I've had to learn this the hard way over many years. So, even today, like I'm a mom of two toddlers and I don't get to race in the same way that I used to because I'm choosing that because I want to be there for my kids. But how do you find joy and meaning and purpose in your process, even when you're not performing at the level you want? And most people don't ever get to perform at the level that they want. So
Mhm.
going back to like, okay, like how am I applying my values to the things that I'm doing? How is this helping me become the person that I want to be? What am I getting from this? And some days you're not going to be getting much from it, but it's the consistency that matters most because whenever we're doing hard things, like a lot of times it doesn't feel good. Like there's not positive emotions associated with it, but there's other aspects of well-being that are like novelty or meaning, or maybe you're building relationships or maybe you're building your perspective. So for me, like I've been racing mountain bikes for 20 years and I've accomplished everything that I've wanted to accomplish in the sport, which I'm so grateful and so fortunate. But like I think it's more of a question of how do you stay engaged if you're not accomplishing. And I think it's coming back to those things. If you're only doing it for the accomplishment, then you're not going to want to do it for much longer. Or if everything about yourself is hedged upon accomplishing the thing, then it's probably not going to be very rewarding anymore.
Mhm.
And I always say like, I wish that I could just tell people this, that it's not just about the outcome. It's not just about the award, the rewards. Like you're never going to achieve enough. Like in my mind, it's like nothing will ever be enough. And I've accepted that that's okay. And that actually helps me not push so hard to the detriment of other things in my life. But I feel like you have to go through that. You have to touch the hot stove of that before you can actually practice that. And I wish that there was a way that people could know that because people think if I could just get whatever this thing is, if I could just get there, then I'm finally going to be happy. I'm finally going to feel like people take me seriously. I finally feel like I'm going to be enough. And that's just not the case.
Mm-hmm. It's a curious dilemma for people, isn't it? Because as creatures, as living beings, we are all fundamentally goal driven. We're goal driven to satisfy needs for thirst, for example, for hunger, for sleep, and social connection, and so on. We have deeply embedded within us the idea of getting the thing that we want, and at the same time, what I'm hearing you describe here is the importance of almost well, de-emphasizing or sometimes even disconnecting from the accomplishment while still in the pursuit of something that's important to you.
This is almost exactly what I'm doing my capstone thesis on for my master's. It's about perfectionists and how perfectionists, especially self-oriented ones who have exceedingly high expectations for themselves, they don't experience positive emotions necessarily around their accomplishment, that sense of accomplishment. They experience relief. And then it's not enough. And it's like, what's the next thing? So I think especially, and I think most people are on a scale of this. So like there is a perfectionist scale. So I'm trying to explore ways that people can experience meaning around their accomplishments or other things around their accomplishments that don't have anything to do with the evaluation of the outcome itself. Because the reason why people do things is multifaceted. It's not just because they want a master's degree or just because they want to make a certain amount of money. There's other reasons underneath all of that. So I think in the goal setting process, I absolutely think we should be driven and go after our goals. And I'm a highly driven, motivated person, which is why I'm doing all this work. But understanding what those other things are and how those are important to you, I think can really help you, whether you get that accomplishment or not, because there's something else there. There's a reason why you're going after that in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about something in your life that at one stage you had a burning desire to accomplish, and now you're very, very happy and relieved that you didn't accomplish it.
That's another good question. I don't think that there is anything that I can think of that was really important to me.
Mm.
There's a couple things that I'm actively working on that I have not yet accomplished, but I know that I will. Like number one is becoming an author and writing a book. There's always going to be a part of me that like chafes at the fact that I'm not an Olympian, but there was never an Olympic distance in the sport that in my sport for the domain that I was doing. So the ultra endurance domain. I've always wanted to do a PhD. I don't know if I ever will because I really like being in the applied domain. But I also love academics and the research. So that's something that I might not ever do or realize, but I'm okay with those things. Those aren't like goals that pass me by. I think it comes down to this intent around why you're setting these goals and what those are. Because it's like I believe that I can do all those things, but why? What's the purpose behind it? And what's that going to get for me? And that's hard. That like it does chafe at me, some of those things that haven't happened yet. But I try to say, like, what am I getting from this, or what am I trying to get from this? And I think knowing what you're trying to get from this is something that's really important. So if I want to get a PhD just to have it next to my name so people take me seriously, well, that's the wrong reason. If I want to get a PhD so that more people read my books, well, that's the wrong reason. Ultimately, you get a PhD as a research psychologist, so to speak, because you want to do research, because you love doing research. And I don't know if I love doing that. So yeah, I think it's like peeling back the layers as to why you're doing something in the first place. And I guess the question you asked is to try to give people actionable things to do or to think about if they had a goal that they were chasing that passed them by that they didn't get to accomplish. I'd say, like, what other parts of you are you able to like, we have multiple parts of our identity. There's probably a value you were trying to exercise in achieving that goal. What's something else that you can do to exercise that value? What's something else that's more within your control? That's because I think a lot of times we set these goals and they're out of our control. Like you could say, I want to win a race, or like, to keep it easy and in the sport domain, I have zero control over the overall fact that I win the race. I can control my effort. I can control my actions. I can control my attitude. I can control my preparation to some extent. When you're sick all the time with kids, you actually can't. So it's like, how do you focus on those controllables? Because ultimately on race day, I can't control the weather. I can't control bad luck. I can't control other people. And especially in a competitive setting, or like if somebody's like trying to become a New York Times bestseller, like you could have the most amazing book, but you might not make it on the list. And that's not really in your control. So like what is within your control and how does that relate to your values so that you can experience a sense of fulfillment, even if the outcome isn't the thing that you're hoping for?
Mm-hmm. It does. What you're describing just here, Sonia, leads me to immediately question with no disrespect to you,
Uh-huh.
immediately question the whole notion of what it even means to be a world champion at something. Uh, I
Uh-huh.
mean, at some level, it kind of means that a whole bunch of factors outside of our control just happen to align on the day.
It is true. I mean, everybody at the top level is at the top level. And there's very marginal things that separate the person from the one who's winning and the person who's coming like 20th place. So absolutely at the highest level, everybody is performing well, but something special has to happen on that day to win the medal or to win the world championship. Or you
Mm.
have to be in the right place at the right time, or you have to have chosen to go 1 year over another. Like maybe there was somebody better than you that just wasn't there that year and you just happened to win because they weren't there, which doesn't it doesn't devalue the accomplishment, but there's a million ways you can devalue your accomplishment, even if you've won whatever the race or you've gotten the promotion or you've got tenure or whatever it is that you're going for. So like instead of going down that path of trying to devalue your accomplishment, which is what I do and what I work on all the time, how do I not devalue this thing that I work so hard for? Like, what are the other things that you can ask yourself? What is valuable? How has this impacted me? How have I changed through this process? How has this impacted others? And what do I believe about myself now going into the future because I did this thing?
Mm. Sonia, if you were to, in a sense, kind of step out of yourself and look across the span of your life to date, how much of the the content, the concepts, the ideas behind positive psychology were just there for you anyway, even before you started formally studying it?
Yeah, a lot of it. There's a genetic component for sure to a lot of these traits that we have, and I think I am predisposed to a lot of the traits that align with well-being, like pursuing well-being. I found positive psychology in it was probably like 2012 or 2013. And it's because my husband heard a speaker, Sean Acor, who's author of The Happiness Advantage, at a conference. And he said, "Hey, you might want to check out this book because this really describes a lot of the ways that you talk about things." And I realized, oh my gosh, there's an entire field to describe what I'm trying to do. Like I'm trying to explain to people, like, how do you be resilient? I'm trying to explain to people, how do you set goals? And I'm trying to learn about it myself in the process because I was just looking at myself and trying to reverse engineer what I was doing. There's my engineering degree. So yeah, discovering the field. And then I spent the last decade studying everything I possibly could, grabbing any book I could, having anyone on my podcast I could to learn about positive psychology and other areas of psychology. And I've been wanting to do this master's degree for such a long time, but I was really committed to my racing and I was traveling all the time. So it just wasn't feasible until now. And learning the language of positive psychology and now what I've learned in this master's degree, it just takes what I'm doing to an exponential level and it allows me to really help others and be even more effective in what I'm doing and also uncover buckets of, like, I never knew about Isaac Pilotensky's work on mattering, and that is changing the way that I'm doing some of my work. Like I have something called a Women's Cycling Summit where I'm trying to empower women to turn intention into action and to help build more equity in the sport. And there's a huge mattering problem in cycling. There's not a lot of fairness. There's not a lot of allowing women to add value and feel valued. So just getting more language, I think, was one of the most important things about learning. Is we get language for things we didn't know that we had, and then we're able to hopefully apply it in our lives to make not only our own lives better, but to make a positive impact on the world.
Mm-hmm. I wondered, I'm intrigued by the project you're talking about, the
Mm.
Women's Cycling Summit. I wonder whether you could share with us a positive outcome that you've already seen from that.
Yeah, so we've only done it 1 year. This will be our second annual Women's Cycling Summit. The way that we've done it is I've partnered with a race, the Breck Epic, which is a 6 day mountain bike race in Breckenridge, Colorado, which is a high altitude, like just wonderful race that anyone who likes mountain biking should do it. So I partner with the race because number one, whenever you have critical mass, it really helps something be more effective. Number two, I think the vicarious experience piece of self-efficacy, women seeing other women doing things that they want to do, will help them believe that they're able to, and not just at the professional level, because a lot of people can look at a professional rider and say, well, they're not like me, or I'm not like them. I try very hard to be approachable and relatable, but some people just still aren't going to relate to me. So being able to have multiple people and sharing their stories, so it's a bunch of different things. It's group riding, but the thing that sets us apart from a lot of other women's events, it's basically a personal development conference for women through the lens of cycling, and it brings in people who are professional racers, sure, but also people who are like CEOs in the business, or people who are just doing different things within cycling, so that women can see themselves in that person's story and then feel like they can take action and have support, so that if they want to do that thing, they can. So last year,
Mm-hmm.
first year events are small. Like we didn't have, hundreds of people at the event, but I would say that it was a great success in that it really brought together the women's professional racing field at the event, which was not something I was expecting, because I invited everybody to be a part of the event if they wanted to be. And it allowed people to connect with each other in a different capacity that is not the same as when you're on the race course. It was more on this, like, how are we the same? Because when you're competing against somebody, like, you're just trying to be better than them. You're trying to compete better than them. So whenever you're more in a collaborative space, it made the racing even better. And it also increased women's participation overall at the race. Just having the Women's Cycling Summit there, they experienced, it was like 122% increase in participation across the board. And for this next year, we're anticipating a 400% increase in women's participation just from having the event there. Not even necessarily having tons and tons and tons of attendance at the event, but just the presence of it there. And as I'm talking, I'm thinking about some of the things I've been learning about perceived support and optimism, and just not even having the support, the person there, but just the perception that you have support will help, number one, build your performance. There's a really interesting study of Olympians about perceived support relationships and performance, but also in optimism. So if I'm have optimistic expectations, or I'm able to look back at something that happened to me and reframe it in a way that's maybe more optimistic, then maybe I'm going to be more inclined to want to participate or go after the hard thing that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Sonia, I'm going to do something that I teach coaches not to do, and that is double barrel a question. Um, uh, who is a role model for you, and for what reason?
What was a role? It's interesting. I've actually thought about this, because people are like, "Who's your mentor?" or "Who's your..." Honestly, the role models for me are the academics who are out there not only doing the research, but are trying to teach others in the world. I don't have specific people, like I could list people who I look up to, but that's always been very intriguing to me. People who are learning and exploring and then conveying the message in the world. So you would think I would say, oh, sports stars. Like I rarely actually had like a cyclist that I looked up to that said I want to be just like them. It was more people outside the sport that I said I want to be just like them. Like there's multiple like psychologists who have podcasts and write books and are also coaches and doing all these things that I want to do. So I would say those are more the role models for me that help me derive more creativity and the next iteration of how I want to continue to show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. It's a lovely reminder of really what a role model is, I think, and sometimes I think we can all um, fall prey to the view that a role model must be from the same professional domain or area of interest. But in fact, role models are often people who role model elements of character to us,
Hmm.
regardless of the domain that um, they happen to be working in.
Now I want to learn more about role models. Tell us more.
Well, I'll share with you who my role model is. My role model is my neighbour across the road. I'm looking across the road right now as I say this. He's 72 years old, a little bit older than me. He's a high school teacher. I'm not a high school teacher. He's a high school teacher in economics, economics for me is one of those subjects that I came to later in life. It absolutely fascinates me now. As a psychologist, I love understanding economics and economic theory. But my neighbour Ross goes off to work every day to teach, and he's 72 years old.
Hmm.
There's something about the passion that still burns inside him, the desire to support learning, the desire to encourage young people in intellectual and other areas of growth. They're the things that capture and captivate me, and they're the things that I want to ensure a part of my life as I continue to move through it as well. But beyond that, though, we're in completely different areas of practice and work. So um, the idea of character, I think, is as the thing that we role model. The field, I think, the field in which someone works may become a doorway, but that's an accidental doorway because it just happens to be the area in which we're most exposed. For me, that would be psychologists. For you, that might be cyclists. Because that's the world in which we live in. They're the people that we get exposed to. It's at some level, it's a little like you're probably more likely to end up in a relationship with and married to someone who lives in your hometown simply because they're the people that you mix and interact with all the time. But there's no rule or course that says you must do that. We can look much further afield for our role models.
Unless
Yeah.
you are a bike racer and you go to Canada and you meet a guy and then you end up moving to Canada.
So your move to Canada, more for cycling, more for love.
Love. But
Love.
cycling is
Okay.
a very nice like Canada. British Columbia has the best mountain biking in the world. That's a lovely side effect. But I would have gone anywhere for my husband, my now husband.
Uh-huh.
And he's
Uh-huh.
also a role model for me, by the way. Like, I think I want to come back to this idea of role modeling because I think we're uncovering some
Mm.
really interesting insights for people. When you ask who's your role model, I think a lot of people think it needs to be some public figure who's famous or someone who's accomplished, publicly all these amazing things. And just thinking about character and role models, like, I think I have a lot of role models. And it's because I look around me and I say, well, I'm inspired by, the fact that our nanny for our kids is so playful and creative all the time. I'm
Mhm.
inspired by
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
My friend, her name is Brenda Davis, and she's a luminary dietitian, and she's 65, and she like what you said about your neighbor. She's so passionate about her work. She said to me on her 60th birthday when I asked her, what does it mean to you to be 60? She said, I knew my senior years would be the most impactful of my life. And that has completely changed how I'm viewing my senior years. And like my husband, like he's kind and patient and he's always so supportive of people around him. So I think anybody can be a role model, and maybe it's good to have lots of role models because everybody embodies these different parts of our character that we can really value.
Yeah. Yeah. Picking up on what you mentioned about the public figure idea, one of the errors of thinking sometimes that I think we make is to turn heroes into, or we attempt to turn heroes into role models. We all have heroes in our lives, or I imagine we all have heroes in our lives. One of mine is the astronaut Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, whom I happened to meet 20 years ago out here in
Oh,
Australia. And for me, he's a hero. He's an extraordinary man. He lives in Florida. He's still a fierce advocate of space exploration. He sort of embodies this extraordinary mindset about kind of figuratively and almost literally reaching for the stars. But he's also someone whom I could be. I mean, he's way cleverer than I am. He works in areas that I could never hope to work in, no matter how hard or how much I did. There's something about him and his life and the way he's lived that is utterly beyond me. And if I were to try to turn him into a role model, I'd end up bitterly disappointed. He's best left as a hero, someone who can inspire and excite, and nourish my own curiosity. Whereas people like my neighbour across the road are much better placed as role models. I feel like in another 15 years I could be like that. I feel like I could do those things that he's doing. I want to do those things that he's doing. And I think that's a fascinating pathway for us all to walk. How do we distinguish between people who, on the one hand, excite and inspire us in ways that we can barely imagine, and others who just quietly go about doing their work in ways that we quietly admire and we would love to replicate ourselves.
Thank you. I learned a lot just talking about role models and heroes, and I've never thought about that before, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners haven't either. So thanks for that.
Yeah, wonderful. Let's tell me about. I know you said to me just before we started recording, Sonya. I think you'll finish your Masters in Applied Positive Psychology program in the summer. This coming summer. Share with us, if you would, an extraordinary impact that program has already had for you.
Oh my gosh, I never expected this part of the program. So I went into this program because I wanted to learn from the leaders in the field. I wanted to learn from Marty Seligman. How cool, like, to be starstruck by him and all the other guest lecturer. Like, he's not a guest lecturer, but all the other guest lecturers too, like Barbara Fredrickson, or, all these people that come who are leaders, like Sonya Looney, all these leaders in positive psychology, like Roy Baumeister. Like, how do I get to meet these people who these are I don't know if they're heroes or role models, probably more like heroes, but getting to meet them and learn. I thought that was going to be the most exciting thing, especially because I love learning, and I've been trying to do this on my own. But honestly, it's the community. It's, to quote Chris Peterson, other people matter. And I felt like I found my people. You would think that my people, I love my mountain biking people and my cycling people, but like, I can't explain it. It's a very curated group of people. It's a cohort of 50 people, and there's an alumni network, and I would pay the tuition just to become part of this group of people, because everybody is just, they're so lovely. They're so open and interested and caring and supportive, and have a lot of social intelligence and interesting and diverse. And that's, I would like to say the things I've learned are the best takeaway, but honestly, it's the people.
And I'm hearing in that the sense of belonging.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder whether you could share with us a way. You've told us about how, on reflection, you had naturally embodied a lot of these ideas from positive psychology, kind of just part of who you are and your genetic and social makeup. I wonder, though, if you reflect on your progress, your pathway through the area of positive psychology, something more laterally that you've really learned about yourself or learned to do that's been extraordinarily helpful to you.
Let me think about that for just a second. I've learned so much lately. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. Like where do I even start? Yeah, honestly, I'll go back to that. Isaac Pilatinsky's work on mattering is just, that's just been, I never heard of it before. all the other things I've
Mm.
learned, I've heard of before, and I just got to learn in more depth. But this is something I've just never heard of before. It's coming from the social psychology background, but the world needs more of this. The world needs more.
Mm.
And his book, How People Matter, has it like it doesn't look like a very thick book, but it is so dense with information, and he has so many different levers people can pull on, like his model of well-being. I'm probably going to butcher it, and maybe I can look it up really quickly, but it's this ICOPE framework. I just did a literature review, so maybe I can find it. I'm just going to wait a second because I think people who haven't heard of this might want to know. So he has interpersonal, community, occupational, physical, psychological, and economic dimensions of well-being that that all integrate with mattering and fairness and wellness. And he says that you can't have well-being without fairness, and you can't have mattering without fairness.
Mm.
So, and fairness isn't that everybody should just get the same thing. And he talks about different models of how we should distribute justice in different, in an equal society, in an unequal society, in a relatively unequal society, and how there's bidirectional arrows between self and other in all these different domains. So just having it explained in that way just gave me this aha moment. And I'll tell you, I've actually changed how I'm earning an income because of that. I've been a professional sponsored
Oh.
athlete for a very long time. That was my dream, to become a professional, because there's many professional mountain bikers who don't have sponsorship support or don't have much sponsorship support, where they still have to work like another job. And that was me for a very long time. And I finally got to a point where I had sponsors, where my livelihood came from brands paying me money so that I could go do the thing that I wanted to do. But over time, it became something that I didn't like anymore. And now I only have a couple of sponsors because I didn't feel like I mattered, to use the language, in those relationships. I did not feel like I was adding value, because I would do this work and it just wouldn't be used. Because in sponsorships, it's not just about going fast. It's about how can you create content and deliver more to the brand than just how fast you can go, to help build the community.
Mm.
So I was working so hard to build the community and create all this content in addition to training and racing and performing, but nobody cared about the work I was doing. So I was trying to add value, and nobody was, like, from the brand perspective, they weren't accepting that work, or they weren't using that work for multiple reasons. And because of that, I couldn't feel valued. And then
Mm.
that was impacting my well-being. I thought, well, I guess all this work I'm doing doesn't matter. Like, why should I even try? Or the economic piece of it is, I would over deliver on everything on my contract, and then, relationships change, or they would have a new person come in, and all of the relationships with sponsorship is very relational. It's not performance based. It's like, who do you know, and do they like you, or do they think you're cool?
Mm.
And so I would be working super hard to do all these things for this brand and get let go when a new person would come in. So over a decade of that became really bad for my psychological well-being. And from an economic standpoint, I just started feeling helpless. Like, no matter how hard I work, no matter what I do, nothing's going to matter. So I decided, after learning this last semester, that I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm going to really be focusing on my coaching business and on my keynote speaking, and on doing workshops and on teaching, because that's a way that I can add value and feel valued in my life that I have control over to some degree. Whereas with the other things I was doing, I didn't really feel that anymore. And that's a huge thing to do as a professional athlete, to say, I've been a pro sponsored athlete for a decade, and I'm going to walk away from this model because this is not good for me. So I'll let you know how that goes. It's only been like, it was only February. So
Wonderful. So one of the things that we're talking around this, and we haven't actually named it yet, but I'm going to name it right now, and that is the absolute centrality of language in all of this, because language can variously make things visible to us. It can make things invisible to us. It can strengthen things. It can diminish things. The language that we use, the language that we choose to use, the language that we choose to learn to use, is possibly the most important component here.
yeah, that's such a great point. And even, our language, English, doesn't have words for certain things that our other languages have multiple words for. Or was just gonna make a joke about like Aussie slang. There's you can shorten words, and then maybe you can use more words because you shorten words, or or being concise with your language. Yeah, absolutely. Language is so important. And I was actually on a podcast earlier today talking about the importance of communication and how that should be taught as a competency in school, and it's not. And bad communication, like it happens everywhere, and learning how to communicate. And there's also cultural context to how we communicate. So that should be something that we're learning, because as we know, like relationships are so important, but if we don't know how to communicate, how are we supposed to build healthy relationships? And also communication with ourselves. You asked me, what are the things you say to yourself in a race, your self-talk? Well, that's also a language that you have to learn.
mm, mm, mm. And a language that can become quite self-destructive as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or can lead to extraordinary growth if we use that language well and carefully.
Yeah, I like to say the most powerful voice is the one inside your own head. Hopefully you don't hear too many voices, but
Sonya, I wonder, I'd love, well, our listeners, of course, have been. You made a comment earlier about drinking from a fire hose, and I think that's been the experience of our conversation for the last 30 or so minutes. Certainly, it has for me. I suspect it has been for our listeners as well. If you look again, I'm going to use that analogy or that image of looking back across the arc of your life. If you do that right now, if you look across the arc of your life from where you stand now, what's the one thing that you would want our listeners to walk away with from this point forward?
Honestly, I'll go back to the thing I said about when I found mountain biking. It takes courage to explore new things, especially when you're older, and it takes courage to pivot, especially when you're older. And I think it's so important to do it, to be curious and to talk all the things we talked about, understanding why you're doing it, because you can discover things that you never knew existed that can completely change your life. And I feel like this it's not a second iteration of my life, but it's just a continuation of, as I'm 40 now, and in Arthur Brooks' book From Strength to Strength, he talked about fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And I feel like I'm jumping onto the second curve of crystallized intelligence. And how can I, bring all these things that I've learned across my life together to help other people? And a lot of people would say, what? You had this career where you were thriving at the top level of your sport, and you decided to have kids, which didn't end the sport for me, but it created a lot of challenges for me. Which I actually had a documentary come out on that toured the world at a film festival. If anyone wants to watch it, it's free to watch. It's called Benched. It's about challenging societal norms, but perspective taking. I'm choosing to have kids because I know that matters to me, even if it comes at the expense of some of my success in my athletic career. I'm choosing to go to graduate school and have to travel to Pennsylvania when I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. People say, why would you ever choose to do that? You don't actually need to do that. But I think aligning yourself with growth and saying, like, what is important to me and how can I continue growing in my life so that I can stay passionate and engaged? That takes courage to do that. And it also takes courage to keep showing up every day to the thing that you're doing, because you're not going to always want to do it.
Mm-hmm. What a wonderful note to finish on, the idea of grabbing hold of courage and growing courage within us to do the things that we want to do, maybe need to do, but the things most of all that matter to us. Sonya, thank you so much for such a delightful conversation. For those of you listening or watching, Sonya Looney, world champion mountain bike cyclist, masters qualified electrical engineer, self-confessed nerd, and courageous go-getter and curious traveller.
And flawed human being.
Thank you. Sonia, thank you so much for being available to speak with me today. To be watching, do subscribe to the podcast. It's very easy. You can click subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app. If you haven't yet done so, jump on to the Global Positive Health Institute website, positivehealth.world. In there, you'll also find a link to a project of mine, Tiny Health Stories. I would love you to take a look at Tiny Health Stories and consider making a contribution to that as well. Thank you.